input, but it's certainly not the only one, but it's certainly an important and relevant document. I hope that answers the question. Thank you, Michael.
Absolutely, Stephen, and it just underscores the breadth of what the working group has before it to consider, and it is your job, it is our job together to put it in a way that is distilled to the relevant and digestible somehow, so that we can make the best use of our time and to move the issue to a satisfactory conclusion that it presents states with material that they can debate effectively, and in order to have the goal be their goal, be along the lines of what they intend. So it's an interesting journey, and with that, I really want to thank you, Stephen, again for laying out these issues. We are incredibly lucky to have such a distinguished legal mind to work on this. We have excellent political leadership in this working group as well, from Ambassador Mishtal. The dynamic duo of you two is very much appreciated again. And with that, I would like to thank you again and pass over to the Major for any comments she may have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a comment, new times bring new legal issues, and it's so hard to strike a balance between economical interests versus sustainability issues. And I believe, as the ambassador and Mr. Freeland said, ambitious but practical approach to it, where inclusion is an issue. It's a great way to approach the subject because, as you said, it generates consensus. So it's more easy to implement those policies in the different states, which I believe is what we want to do. So thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you.
And now we present Professor Magdalena Hoffmann from Luxembourg University, who's gonna be presenting on the overview of building blocks for space resources as a potential legal framework for sustainable exploration of celestial bodies. So, Professor Melina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Major Fabry. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to present you the work of the Hague Working Group, which took part in 2016 to 2019 and culminated by an adoption of a set of recommendatory principles. The next slide, please. May I ask you to move the slides, please?
I believe they are continued to be shared by your screen. Is that correct?
They are somehow not moving.
Okay. Just a moment.
So if you wish, I can...
Do you want to try to reshare it from
your side? Yes.
If that doesn't work, then I'll go ahead and try to do it.
Just a moment.
Thank you very much, and sorry for these technical difficulties.
No problem.
Madam Professor, I think that we are able to share now. If that's okay, we can do it from our side.
Yes, please, for the sake of time, yes.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. So first, before the program starts working, let me to introduce myself. My name is Magdalena Hoffmann. I am a professor of space, satellite communication and media law at the University of Luxembourg and also co-director of the master program in space and telecommunication law. At the same time, I keep lecturing at the Charles University in Prague. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how shall I structure my short presentation? So we heard already about the open issues in international law presented by Ambassador Mishta and my estimated colleague Stephen Freeland. Then I would like to give you a very short overview of space resources issue in national law. And then I would like to concentrate that it's the core of my presentation on the recommendation of so-called the Hague Group. The next slide, please. So we heard that in international law, there are many open questions which started to be debated from the beginning of the projects to extract minerals from outer space. And the most important one is the problem of the prohibition of appropriation and occupation of the territories in outer space. Next slide, please. Then we heard from Professor Freeland that a couple of countries have adopted already their own legislation on space resources. Here we see a short overview of the US legislation. Next slide, please. After US, it was Luxembourg which adopted a law which allows to appropriate space resources. Next slide, please. As a third country, it was United Arab Emirates who adopted a federal law on the space sector authorizing the space resources activities. And the next slide, please. And the last but not least, it was Japan, which adopted only last year a specific Space Resources Mining Act, which contains the procedure of authorization of space resources activities. To sum up these 4 slides, we can say that they are national steps which are shared by many other countries. They are sharing that it is possible to adopt such legislation, but there are others who are not convinced about a unilateral approach and who would like to have much more consented international framework. We heard already very convincingly that the core of these debates takes place in the UN COPUOS, but there are also non-governmental initiatives which are working on the less formal basis, which has its advantages and disadvantages, of course, and which are able to prepare sets of principles which can serve as an example or model or contribution to the international discussion. The next slide, please. So now we shall stay for a couple of minutes on this slide. One of these non-governmental initiatives was opened by the government of Netherlands and later adhered by other countries, which saw that it would be a good idea to have a forum where not only states are represented, but also the operators, the future operators of space resources activities can take place, where also the academia can express its views. And indeed, this group met first in 2016. And I am very proud that I have been given today the role to report about the work of this group, which I can confess was very dynamic was not only in full consensus, because all the diverging interests were represented, but at the end it succeeded to adopt a set of rules by consensus, which were then forwarded to the knowledge of the UN COPUOS and UN OSA. So you can find the text of these building blocks on the website of the University of Leiden, and you can also find the details of these working building blocks in a publication which was published by 11 under the editorship of Olavo de Bittencourt, Tanya Masson-Zvan, Dimitra Stefudi, and myself. So you will find much more details and backgrounds of these working building blocks in this publication. So I would like to stress once more the outcome of this working group is not more than recommendations. Cannot be more, of course, because it's not an official group where only governments are represented. But I see as a great asset that these recommendations are coming also from the users. So from the potential users, and that many open issues were discussed, and I will lead you through 8 of these building blocks to show you what were the most disputed issues. And as my task was to report about this outcome under the focus of sustainability, I would like to stress that in principle, the whole document serves to the sustainability, to guarantee the sustainability of space resources activities in the broad sense, but I will also underline those specific principles which serves to guarantee the sustainability of space resources activities in a narrow sense, in the, let's say, environmental sense. So first, what is the scope? What is the aim of these principles? So the aim is to create an enabling environment. So the purpose is not to impose additional burdens on states or on the operators. In the contrary, the atmosphere of these building blocks is very open. They are bringing some principles of coordination of these activities on international level, and where they are trying to harmonize these activities is under the primary goal to enable, to open an atmosphere for such activities. The aim is also to prepare a background for a future international framework. So these principles, even if they would be adopted by someone, a state or an international organization, they are not self-executing. They are not binding or imposing some rules on states or operators. Their goal is to create an international framework. So they are formulated as the international framework should enable something, or the international framework should be formulated as. The second important issue is that the idea of this Hague Group was that in order to have a sustainable international framework, the operators, this international framework should enable priority rights to operators. The idea behind this comes from the framework of the International Telecommunication Union, which for not decades, but today we can speak even for centuries, is based on the attribution of priority rights to operators. meaning that an operator, duly internationally and nationally registered, has some sort of priority negotiation rights with the latecomer. So they are not priority rights in the sense of ownership. It would be completely prohibited in the law of outer space. Every one of you knows perfectly Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. But it's a priority in negotiation. So when a latecomer wants to mine on the same territory as the first comer, the newcomer has to enter into negotiations with the first one. So that's the system taken over from the ITU regime, and it would be great pleasure to go into details on this on the basis of your questions or perhaps later in any other occasion. The third rule that this international regime should enable so-called resource rights over materials and product recognized. And you could legitimately ask me what is meant by resource rights. Here I have to confess that this formulation is a result of long-term heated discussion in the working group. Of course, there was interest to have instead of resource rights, to have a term ownership rights. But because the group was legitimately represented not only by countries who are having already such plans, but also the countries which do not have their own space activities yet and see themselves endangered in having some countries going ahead. So they did not want to have any ownership rights seen in these building blocks, and the group was able to find a consensus in the word resource rights. So in principle, ownership rights were behind, but the term had to be softened on the basis of the discussion. In number 4, I am coming to the environmental measures. So they are the sustainability principles in the narrow sense. So the Hague building blocks require that the states and operators, when going into outer space, are taking measures on planetary protection to avoid contamination of celestial bodies, that they are taking measures to prevent backward contamination, that the Earth could be contaminated by the materials brought from outer space. And third, that they are taking measures preventing unnecessary debris in outer space. So all these 3 elements are included. Number 5, so the international framework recognizes the right of operators to establish so-called safety zones. Again, it was a heated debate around this principle, because you know that there is a clear prohibition to create any ownership in outer space of territories by long-term occupation. So there was the discussion, where is the difference between safety zone and a long-term occupation? Would not a safety zone lead to a long-term occupation of a celestial body? But the operators were able to convince the Hague group, saying, but we could not work without safety zones. If we should really start any exploration and exploitation of space resources, we need to have some zone where we can safely perform our activities. And if anyone wishes to enter the same zone at the same time, please let us know in ahead, that we can take all precautionary measures, that we can guarantee that there is a safe entry into this territory. I'm sorry. So by safety zones, the Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty is not circumvented. It is perhaps rather a consequence of Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. The six building blocks. Long discussion took place on the implementation of the principle of province of mankind, which is a sacred principle of the Outer Space Treaty. So how to guarantee that this principle is reflected in these activities? There were a lot of ideas how to implement it. So one of the idea was to oblige the operator to contribute to an international fund, for instance, obligatory, by a part of their profit. I can just share you one insight. The operators were asking not to write down such principle because they say many of the newcomers will be startups without any own start capital. So they will have to borrow by bank. They will not be wealthy operator to be able to share a lot of their assets. If there would be any assets, they will have to be paid to the bank to pay out the loan. So at the end, the Hague Group agreed on the fact that there should not be any compulsory benefit sharing, but they should be cooperative measures like inviting the companies from developing countries to participate in the projects. Opening of educational opportunities for the participants from non-space countries. And also the operators have been invited to contribute on the free basis to an international fund which should serve for countries or projects from countries which do not have their own space activities. And last but not least, because the time is running, to guarantee the communication between the operators and between the states and the operators, there should be a national register of activities of space resources, and there should be also a specific international registry for space resources activities. Again, here the working group was using the experience of the ITU with its master international frequency register, which registers the frequency priority rights. So let me to stop here. Let me to sum up very shortly. The Hague building blocks are recommendatory rules, not binding, cannot be binding, elaborated by a multi-stakeholder international group, which should serve as a food for thought. And what I really consider to be the biggest value is that they are not coming only from academia, I myself coming from academia, but they were created in the cooperation with the operators, with the potential business people, and with those in whose hands these events or these projects will be. So let me to thank for your kind attention, and I'm open for all the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that very detailed and very interesting discussion of the process that you had undertaken over a number of years. And if I just may ask you, how do you, in your experience in this and working with these various multi-stakeholders, did you experience that there was a really a lot of interest of private sector to come in and really find the solutions for this that would help them undertake these activities? Maybe you can say a few words about that, about your experience with being in the mix, so to speak.
Thank you so much for this question. It was a lot of interest from the private sector, and all companies existing and potential were represented. Let me to mention iSpace and at the time Planetary Resources, Deep Space, and all of them. And if you would be interested to know more, their reports are also contained in this tiny book. So you will find also the reports from the operators included here.
Thank you so much again, please. And over to you, Major Fabri, for any comments you please have.
Thank you. As a comment, it's so relieving to know that there's work regarding the environment and how to keep it safe. Because, I mean, we see how things are in our planet. So it's such a big issue to being able to generate a framework that even if it's not binding, it helps all the states, to work with it so we can preserve other space while we may or may not do some activities out there. And we have a question from one of our attendees. Juan Quilaleo asks, these agreements establish years of exploration and years of exploitation? So if you may say some words about that.
Unfortunately, acoustically, I had difficulties to understand the question. Could you repeat it, please?
He's asking if these agreements, these blocks, establish years of exploration and years of exploitation.
So they are not fixed to specific year. So they are meant as a ideas how these activities can be performed in the future, and perhaps if the operators would find them to be good to be followed, they could serve as some sort of standards, perhaps, especially in the part dealing with the registry, dealing with the protection of environment. So, and they are intended to serve both for the exploration part and for the exploitation part. So both of these parts are covered.
Thank you, Professor. So,
thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Rosa Maria Ramirez from Mexico, who's going to present on the governance of the moon and other celestial bodies, perspectives from developing countries. Señora Rosa, el piso es suyo.
Buenos días, Michael. ¿Vas a proyectarlo o quieres que lo proyecte?
Are you going to project, Michael, or does the professor project? We can't hear you.
Well, I'm talking. Did you
No,
hear
we
me?
can't hear Michael. I think he's saying something.
Michael.
Yeah.
Well, in any case, let me know.
Just a second here. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes.
Very
I send you the last version because I have a mistake. If you take into account, please.
Okay.
I appreciate.
Let me just look quickly.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and do this.
No,
Yes.
well, it's quite different. I send you the last version, but in any case, it's okay. Well,
Thank you.
good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Niklas Hedman, Acting Director of UNOSA. Thank Felipe Cousinho, Head of Division of International and Human Security, Ministry of Foreign Affairs de Chile. Luis Ayala González, Deputy Secretary of Defense, Ministry of Defense Chile, and this es un pequeño comercial. Chile, muchas gracias por el apoyo brindado a México sobre cooperación en imágenes satelitales por desastres naturales. Después de este agradecimiento, preparé mi presentación en inglés. Les ruego me disculpen porque mi inglés no es muy bueno. Next one, please. Could you, Michael? Well, it's an index, general background, introduction, current situation, governments, a proposal. Next, please. Well, the Moon Agreement is the last of the international treaties that made up the other space law. The name has 18 ratifications and some signatures. None of the countries with significant technological capacities to access other space had ratified it. Drafted during the end of the space race between the USA and the USSR, its objective in the royal term is to introduce greater details in the core of the space law about the scope and limits of the state activities in other space that the other space treaty or OST it had already advances, and in particular on the issues of the appropriation and use of the moon and celestial bodies, as well as the natural resources they contain that are within the solar system. Let's try to read in English. Okay. Well, the law acceptance of this instrument is likely to relate to the two elements that it included and the causes controversy during its negotiation. First of all, the concept of common heritage of mankind, and secondly, the resources used regime oriented to the economic exploitation that it proposed. Next, please. The Moon Agreement essentially arose from the work that copies carried out from this initial proposal. USA in 1966, Argentina 1970, and USSR 1971. In 71, the Legal Subcommittee of Copies included a new theme in this agenda, matters related to the moon, and created a working group to address it. From this work, the first draft emerged in 1922, which was generally accepted although with reservation, but in relation to both the scope of its application and the concept of common heritage on humankind. Finally, in 1978, Austria proposed a draft agreement that was the result of some informal negotiation that made it possible to overcome previous reservation, which paved the way for the adoption of a final draft that was presented to the United Nations General Assembly in 1979. Next, please. The negotiation and drafting of the Moon Agreement was carried out in parallel to the negotiation of the Third Convention of the Law of the Sea and Coast of the Montego Bay, agreement which had a decisive influence of the issue of the common heritage and mankind's similarity The Antarctic Treaty influenced other provisions of the Moon Agreement, such as the free access, demilitarization, and mutual inspection. The Moon Agreement was ready for signature in December 1979 and entered into force in July 1984. Today, only 18 countries have ratified, and it was 5 more have signed it. Next, please. It is important to point out that the Moon Agreement is the first of international agreement relating to outer space to include an explicit physical delimitation for its area of application. It said the scientists. With celestial bodies to refer to any aggregation of matter in space that constitute a unit, this included planets, asteroids, comets, moon, etc. The limitation to the solar system, whose limit from the scientist's point of view is the Earth cloud a light year away. From human activities make sense in the understanding that these activities are limited to that part of the universe that human beings have discovered and now with relative certainty. An exception is also added to the article that is specified that its scope may be limited if specific legal norms are established for any other celestial body, which, from the Moon Agreement itself, make it more flexible to determine the status of other celestial bodies, as the case opens the door to the possibility of establishing international agreements that are oriented to space mining activities, at least in bodies other than the Moon. Next, please. The strategy is directly related to the process that took place in the Montego Bay negotiation during the Third United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and Coast. To understand the meaning and scope of this expression, it is necessary to analyze its inclusion in the Moon Agreement in relation to the international context of time, and in particular with the international legal context characterized by the UNCLOS negotiation, where the concept of common heritage of mankind was discussed and elaborated extensively. In 1960s and 1970s, were characterized by an effort by developing countries to reach a new international economic order more favorable to their interests. The main obstacle was considered to be an underdevelopment that had been induced by developed countries during the long colonization process, and from which they achieved their development in the first place. Based on the premise of the objective of development countries was to promote an international legal regime that will validate the obligation of transfer of technology from developed to underdeveloped countries and the development of a system that will authorize concession on a defined set of international public goods such as the ocean floor of the ocean. Next, please. This demonstrates that the idea of the common heritage of mankind should not be understood as a static concept, but a dynamic concept that is subject to the interpretation that international political context can bring, as well as the specific requirement of the sector. The Moon Agreement can be understood as a proposal to establish a regime for the exploration of the Moon and its natural resources, which included some guidelines for its exploitation in the future. Next, please. Current situation. Lunar exploration is witnessing, sorry for my pronunciation, an ever faster proliferation and planned mission led by government commercial stakeholders in 2022 alone. More than 6 missions from government and private are planning to launch and to reach the lunar surface, and or the cislunar space. In 2023 and later years, the rate of launches to the moon will increase. Michael, sorry, it not appear complete the text. Could you, please? The format is not complete. Well, I have paper. And two, the growing interest in the moon and specific areas such as the lunar south pole highlight the need to create coordination mechanisms that allow a peaceful and sustainable exploration of the moon. These mechanisms should be suitable for balancing the interests of diverse stakeholders, private and governments, and guaranteeing the full achievement of the freedom of exploration, use, access, and scientific investigation of the lunar and cislunar space for all countries in the world. I will recommend that you to read the handbooks to the new actor in space. This is very important book that you can read in Secure World Foundation website in English, French, Spanish, and Chinese. Well, next, please. If these discussions are not initiated in a timely manner, there is the risk either of unwanted accidents like possible damage to a spacecraft landing in close proximity of each other of generation of debris in lunar orbit that could create risk to future mission and limit the sustainability of lunar exploration as it has been for the Earth orbits. Developing countries should play an important role in the consensus building for the lunar coordination, as they may not be ready at this time to be directly involved in the planned lunar mission, but their interests must be considered. Mexico is part of the Artemis agreement, and we are preparing something in relation with. Next, please, governance. The theme of the conference is United Nations Chile Conference of Space Law and Policy, Governance and Legal Perspective of Space Activities in Earth Orbit and Beyond. The board governance has always disturbed me. I'm a lawyer. My first reference is the state, Estado. Why? The state is composed according to the traditional legal theory in government, population, and territory. The term government means the set of organs and institutions that control and administer the power of the state. In other words, the government is the authority that directs, controls, and administers the state apparatus. Next, please. There is an obligatory reference that I reproduce in some of its parts. Origin of the McKill Global Special Governance Study and co-derived from the so-called Montreal Declaration on Global Governance from the second conference chaired by Professor Ram Jaku and Dr. Joseph Felton. They just get the Institute of Air and Space Law of McGill University in Montreal, Canada, to compile and disseminate an international interdisciplinary study examining the diverse of space regulation and standards. Several conferences follow and from the topic of Global Space Governance Study, GCG, emerging and ultimately a study on the subject of different qualities participate and their work is reflected in the book Governance of Global Space, Proposed Key Action, with the authorship of Professor Ram and Jagu and Dr. Geoffrey Penton. Next. I will not give a lecture of everything mentioned in the book. It's big. But the link for your reference I included in the presentation. But the point I must refer to is that the word governance is not the appropriate one when we refer to the occupation of the moon and other celestial bodies. Recommendable thing to do is to negotiate and elaborate regulation on the basis of coordination and cooperation, which will bring together a normative corpus that allows all developed and developing and emerging countries an orderly coexistence. Next, please. Proposal. Mexico welcomed the creation of the Working Group on Space Resources at the 60th session of the Legal Subcommittee under the agenda item entitled General Exchange of View on Potential Legal Model for Activities in the Exploration, Exploitation, and Utilization of Space Resources, as is indicated in paragraph 255 and the document A-AC period 105-1243. It is available in the website of the UNO. Secondly, nonetheless, the magnitude of the issue relating to the exploration and use of lunar and cislunar space is far greater than the use of space resources alone. Some of the more urgent considerations include, but are not limited to, information sharing, the establishment of safety zones, debris mitigation, environmental and heritage preservation, interoperability, sustainability, coordination between scientific and commercial endeavors, and more. Next, please. The existing permanent agenda item, space exploration and innovation, already provides a good place to initiate the discussion of lunar coordination mechanism. The delegation are inviting member states to approve the inclusion on the agenda item, space exploration and innovation of a new year agenda sub-item relating to coordination for sustainable lunar activities in 2023 at the 66th COPUS session. This is in view of the urgency of the issues indicated above and given the interlinked and complex technical legal consideration. Next, please. Recommendation, no conclusion. Mexico intend to present jointly with Romania before the UNO's COPUS Executive Secretariat CRP document with the objective of proposing the inclusion of a new agenda sub-item in the next meeting of the 65th session of the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Other Space COPUS under the following agenda item, space exploration and innovation. The justification derives from the fact that it is indispensable to review and discuss not the governance, but rather coordination and cooperation that will contribute to the establishment of a consensual order given the advent of many already scheduled missions. If you say the Artemis Accord, you could see a reference that I'm talking about. Coordination and cooperation, this is the basis to go to the moon and other celestial bodies. And thank you very much. And my name is Rosamar Ramírez de Arellano Iaro. It's my complete name. I am professor at the university. And thank you very much for the attendance. If you have a question, my colleague Michael probably could give the answer. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair. We are so very happy that you were able to come in and provide some views on the background of the Moon Agreement and its historical development and its connection to other areas of the law that will also come into play in the discussions of the working group on the space resources. I'd just like to apologize as we are having a little bit of difficulties with the screen sharing at this moment. But maybe, Professor, if you could maybe share a few words on the experience or the view of Latin American countries and developing countries in participating in the work of the committee, its subcommittees, and its working group, and what these countries have to offer the process and to ensure inclusivity. Do you have a couple of words on that you can share?
Bueno, Michael, la participación en las misiones, en los proyectos que están en camino, que están previstos, tanto por NASA, por ESA, por China, por Rusia, por varios países, para ir a la Luna, a asteroides y otros cuerpos celestes. Estas misiones deben de ser inclusivas. Es cierto que los países en vías de desarrollo, me voy a referir a Latinoamérica, pero es un contexto que es aplicable a los países en vías de desarrollo o emergentes. Si no los involucramos y compartimos el conocimiento científico, créeme, Michael, créanme, que todos podemos aportar algo. Eso es lo que está haciendo México, está haciendo Argentina, está haciendo Brasil y otros países de América Latina. Entonces, debemos de ser inclusivos. Recuerden, todos los acuerdos que se adoptan en COPIUS es por consenso. De ahí la importancia de involucrar a los países en vías de desarrollo, y hablo de todos, no solamente de los países de Latinoamérica y el Caribe, donde tenemos similitudes en los desastres naturales, pero siempre trabajamos de la mano y la cooperación, como Chile lo ha hecho con México, como con AE de Argentina, vemos cómo ser inclusivos, cómo proveer información, cómo proveer imágenes, cómo proveer el conocimiento científico, la tecnología. Yo sé que esto cuesta. Si nosotros revisáramos, no quise hacerlo hoy a profundidad, pero ya se mencionó, el acuerdo de la Luna, el artículo 11, no dice, los recursos que se encuentren en la Luna y demás cuerpos celestes son patrimonio de la humanidad. En otras palabras, quiere decir que si yo, voy a decir México, que tenemos una misión que va a lanzarse en junio con Astrobotic, tengo la posibilidad de extraer minerales que son escasos en la Tierra, y de esto hablamos mucho en el grupo del Haya sobre recursos, la explotación de recursos espaciales. Ya lo dijo la maestra Maluma de Luxemburgo, Maulena Hoffman de Luxemburgo, ya lo dijo. Tenemos que compartirlos, pero ¿cuál es la idea? La idea es compartir el conocimiento, compartir la ciencia. Yo sé que como decimos, la brecha que existe entre los países desarrollados y en vías de desarrollo o emergentes es muy amplia en materia espacial, pero no por eso es menos importante reconocer por los países desarrollados que pueden incluir en sus programas, en sus proyectos, la participación de estos países. Michael, a mí hay algo que me preocupa, y lo digo respetuosamente y lo he dicho en COPUS, en el subcomité legal. Bueno, tenemos un excelente grupo de trabajo que dirige el embajador Andrés, él habla muy bien español, y tiene una duración de 5 años. Ustedes sí han tenido oportunidad de revisar el proyecto Artemis o el proyecto de China y otros proyectos que están en camino, se pueden dar cuenta que van a estar yendo, regresando, etcétera. Y esto es lo que va a pasar. Entonces, ¿qué va a pasar en el 2026? Y lo dije de manera muy abierta. Bueno, el programa es muy interesante del grupo de trabajo de Copus, que México lo apoya integralmente y hará su mejor esfuerzo porque esto pueda prosperar en la mejor manera, en bien de todos y en bien de la humanidad. Tiene un corte al 2026. Entonces, hay informes recurrentes que va a proveer y los va a obtener la información de todo lo que pueda recopilar y lo que podamos incluir. Pero aprobado por Copus, por consenso, eso es muy importante. Entonces se va a ir a la cuarta, a la Asamblea General, la cuarta comisión. Ahí se va a revisar, se va a discutir, habrá un proyecto de resolución que deberá presentarse a la Asamblea General para su aprobación. Ahí la votación es por mayoría. Esa es una ventaja. Pero recuerden, si no incluimos a todos los países, no importa su grado de desarrollo, yo les puedo decir y platicar abiertamente qué pasa en los países del Caribe, pero no lo voy a hacer. Estamos arrancando en Latinoamérica, ustedes saben, la Agencia Latinoamericana y Caribeña del Espacio, porque queremos trabajar de manera conjunta todos los países para disminuir esa brecha que existe en materia espacial, hablar de proyectos conjuntos, de desarrollos conjuntos, y créanme, ahí vamos a estar. Pero no debemos olvidar la importancia, y no voy a hablar de países ricos o pobres, esto ofende. Y también ofende que hablen de países desarrollados y los de un desarrollo incipiente. Esto ofende y esto lo he hecho notar en Copus. Entonces, Michael, tú lo has dicho en muchas ocasiones, cuando en Unispace más 50, de manera precisa, en esa reunión adoptamos una importante resolución que nos tardó 6 meses de reuniones para que todos nos pusiéramos de acuerdo. Se aprobó y de ahí se presentó, la presenté en la Asamblea General, se aprobó y de ahí pues empezamos a trabajar, a correr el lápiz sobre la Agenda Espacio 2030 y su plan de implementación. Los invito a que lo lean para que nos podamos comprometer, porque también, Michael, los países desarrollados que han desarrollado tecnología, y esto lo dice el acuerdo de la Luna en el párrafo, si mal no recuerdo, 7, en el inciso D, no lo tengo a la mano, pero creo que estoy hablando de memoria, dice que, bueno, pues ellos tienen derecho por investigación, por el tiempo que han invertido, por el dinero, etcétera, a tener una compensación. Esto lo dice el acuerdo de la Luna, al que yo llamo el patito feo, porque todos hacen referencia en Copus a 4 acuerdos y tenemos 5. Entonces, Michael, me puedo estar, ya sabes, los abogados hablan mucho, pero estoy a sus órdenes. Si tienen más preguntas o aclaraciones, con mucho gusto lo voy a hacer. Y muchas gracias por invitarme. Hasta pronto.
Absolutely. It is always a pleasure to work with you, to hear your views, to hear your long wealth of experience that you share with us, and we very much do appreciate everything that you have brought to the committee, that you have brought to an inclusive way of looking at things. We do understand the challenges that you do raise. We want to make a platform in the United Nations, in COPUS, so that there is inclusivity of actors, that those countries that are undertaking space activities also provide opportunities for collaboration to work together with countries from around the world. And in this regard, what you mentioned about the consensus-based decision making, that is unique in all of the United Nations now. It is not that way in other bodies. The General Assembly certainly is not. It's
No.
voting in that body, and for many years there's been talk. There's been it's been raised to move COPUS to a voting system. And I think you have pointed out numerous times how important it is to remain in consensus-based decision making. Yes, it sometimes is a bit difficult, but it is the one way that we have to ensure that all voices are heard. And I think it's important in this next realm where we are dealing with the moon and other celestial bodies, that those that have had experience in their history, in their development, in their since their founding of the countries, have had experience in appropriation, in why that provision is there in the Outer Space Treaty. The provision prohibiting appropriation of celestial bodies is there for a reason, and that must be guarded. Because many of the issues that we have had on Earth in the past are embodied in the Outer Space Treaty, and that they are there because of the experiences of states, and those states need to voice their experience now in this time to ensure that this is appropriately taken into consideration. And I think we have platforms to do that. I want to thank you again for bringing these issues, for reiterating these positions, and for contributing in every way that you have all over these years. It's been an amazing experience, and I thank you again, ma'am. Thank you. With that, I'd like to pass to Major Fabry. Any comments or that you may have, please? Thank you.
Well, I totally agree with the professor. Inclusion is a key factor to generate consensus, and that includes all actors. If there's no consensus, if not everyone is involved, we cannot generate a framework that it's eventually applicable or binding to all states. And so we can safeguard this new space, this new area regarding new activities. So if we don't hear everyone, it's not going to be binding, it's not going to be legitimate. So I totally agree with Professor Ramirez in that sense. I mean, and it includes everyone, not only Latin America. On Monday, we had a presenter from Africa, I believe, that also regard the point. So I think it's quite important to understand that everyone must be heard and everyone must be staked in this new area. So thank you so much, Professor, for your presentation.
Major, I would just like to intervene and just to reiterate that what you say, that this inclusivity is the cornerstone. It's so important for legitimacy of the outcome. Without the legitimacy of the outcome, without the buy-in and the understanding and agreement of all states in this manner that we have in consensus, there will be no legitimacy of these activities, and therefore they will be illegal. And that is the key. That in order for these activities to go forward, and I think that the international community has to be aware of that. If this is the will of the international community for these activities to go forward, that they must be legitimate, and that all the views are taken into account in order to gain that legitimacy. So with that, I really would like to thank you for pointing out that particular word, Major. Excellent point. Thank you.
Yes. We want the peaceful use of our space. If we don't have legitimacy, it's not going to happen. So with that, we're going on a break. We're doing a 10-minute break, so we should be back at 11:27. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. 15 minutes? Yes, okay. That's great.
Muy bien, muy bien.
Hello, welcome, Professor Al-Radan. Nice to see you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Michael. How are you? I was worried I
Absolutely
couldn't log in,
No,
but
it's okay.
it worked.
I'm happy you made it. We were just we were. I was hoping that you were able to, and thank you. That's excellent. Now, do you want to try to share your screen? Because
I don't have any slides, so we'll be fine.
even better in this day and age. Even better. No, that's great. Well, thank you so much. We'll be coming back in just a few minutes. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm just checking that you can listen to me, okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Perfect.
And I just wanted to tell Professor Al-Nayef that we really enjoy listening to his birds. They're so pleasant. I was sitting here thinking how peaceful they were sounding to me. Thank you, sir. Are they your birds in your house, or are they in outside?
Outside.
Okay, okay. No, that's a wonderful thing, actually. It was kind of a ray of sunshine for me over here.
Actually,
Yeah.
from here, from Chile, we are in Chile too. We are talking about the same thing. It's so good to hear the birds from there.
Where are you located, sir? Where are you in the world?
I'm in Geneva now.
Ah,
So
okay.
and it's a bit hot today, unusual for Geneva.
It's hot in Vienna too.
Yeah.
Unusual for here as well.
Yeah.
Here in Chile, it's a little bit cold because we are entering in winter, but it's fine.
We may proceed at any time you're ready. Thanks so much for everyone.
So we can get go.
Yeah, perfect.
Major, how do you feel?
Yeah, we coordinated. So Michael's gonna take the mediation now.
We changed roles here in Chile, so be the
Oh,
second moderator.
Just
thank you.
start.
Yes, absolutely. I wasn't quite aware, but
You
thank you.
weren't in the loop, see, Michael?
No, it's wonderful. Thank you, thank you. It's been I just want to tell you that it's really been a wonderful experience working with you all and putting this together. It really is excellent. You've done so much, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
too. So thank you. Mayra, ¿te
Yeah,
presento o tú partes sola?
No te preocupes, yo parto. Michael, it's okay to start right now? Perfect. Distinguished participants and dear speakers, my name is Magdalena Duran Reyes. I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile, and I will be your second moderator today. Now we will pass to the last segment of this conference, named Safety, Security, and Sustainable Outer Space Activities, or a Governance Perspective. I would like to introduce to our first speaker, Mr. Nayef Alroland of the Geneva Center of Security Policy. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. Thank you to Ambassador Hedman and all of you. Very honored and privileged to be here. I'll talk about governance, safety, security, and sustainability of outer space activities, and I will approach this from traditional but slightly non-traditional ways. It's a little more fun, I think. Let me start out by saying that I do not believe that a serious cascading conflict in outer space is inevitable, but regrettably quite likely. And unless meaningful transnational understandings and binding treaties are enacted, and sooner than later. I have often said in my various writings on the geopolitics of space, and I'll start to quote myself, that if outer space becomes critically unsafe, it will not be selectively unsafe, but unsafe for everyone. I think that's a really important message, and we'll come back to that later to re-emphasize it. A few remarks just to frame our discussion, most of which you probably heard through this elegant conference, but emphasis I think is useful. I think it's worth noting that humanity is becoming increasingly and irreversibly over-dependent on space for most of our daily activities, both in peace and war. And that the range can go from science and exploration, weather, navigation, civil aviation, the internet, climate change, financial markets, arms control verification, etc. Even diplomacy. There's a lot of diplomacy that's quite relevant through space assets. So in reality, any disruption, given the plethora of human activities that is becoming increasing by the day, any disruption to space orbits will be hugely consequential for everyone. As I said in my quote, insecurity will not be selective insecurity. It's not like on a piece of geography on Earth and some piece of continent where, you know, if there's no problem there, it doesn't affect anyone else. Space is not the case, which is, and I'll come back to that, which is shocking, knowing that, why there's so little progress in terms of understandings and treaties and etc. But I have some ideas as to why the international community has been so incompetent in accomplishing that. It's also worth noting that space is becoming increasingly and exponentially congested, contested, and competitive. And space threats, of course, are many and include the usual suspects like space debris, critical militarization of space, and the prefix of critical is important because militarization of space is real, it has always been real, but critical militarization of space is a different subset of that. Space traffic management, increasing and or decreasing, I should say, mistrust, trust, and lack of cooperative will on the part of the international community. The irresponsible ASAT tests that most major space powers have undertaken. Malign activities in space, and those include, as you know, spoofing, jamming, hacking, as well as direct kinetic threats. And more recently, the plethora of private space actors, which is a good thing, but it has its own price. So increasing militarization of space, the advent of the increasing number of space forces, and the deep interplay between terrestrial security and space security which was always known, but now it's even more intimate, as you can see in our unfortunate recent conflict. And the declaration by NATO in December of 2019 in its London meeting that outer space is a war domain, which is a huge statement, and I think a turning point, an unfortunate one, but an understandable one. The lack of codes of conduct, norms in space, binding treaties, and gaps in space law are also serious space threats. Most of you know that the last meaningful treaty was the Outer Space Treaty in 1967, which prohibited the placement of nuclear weapons in space, because prior to that, nuclear weapons were placed in space by the Soviet Union and the US then. But it ignored one significant factor, which is placing other weapons in space. So that was a major shortcoming of the treaty, which I think everybody knew, and it was done between the Soviet Union, the US, and the UK. And probably that was the only, I mean, Michael is in the audience, any meaningful legal language that could be accepted probably at that time. It had some very useful other aspects, which are not the subject of our talk today, but nevertheless, I think ignoring placing weapons in space, non-nuclear, was a major shortcoming. Now, the UN General Assembly in 1981, Resolution 3697, reaffirmed the need to prevent a space arms race. And as a result of that, an ad hoc committee was formed under the auspices of the Conference of Disarmament here in Geneva. But nothing really came out of that. So governance in space remains hugely inadequate for all kinds of reasons. And I'll come back to some of those at the very end when I conclude. I have theorized previously that zero-sum paradigms do not work in space. In fact, they've never worked here on Earth. They're immature, short-sighted, and completely unworkable. So I have advocated what I call multi-sum security principle in place of zero-sum. And in that, I stated that for every state to be secure in our connected and deeply interdependent world, every other state must be secure. And sometimes security is a perception of security, as well as real security. Sometimes, so some states, if they perceive insecurity, then that needs to be attended to, even if it's not real. I've also advocated that classical realist paradigms in space do not work. So I have advocated instead what I call symbiotic realist paradigms. And that is different from, it's a realist approach, but it is a more sustainable approach by preserving specific national interests of states while allowing non-conflictual competition. And it does that primarily by allowing absolute gains rather than relative gains in international relations theory. Over the past 2 decades, Russian and Chinese diplomats made admirable efforts to push for treaties to prevent placement of weapons in outer space, but they did not succeed. The French and the EU also made significant efforts looking for codes of conduct rather than demilitarization, but nothing came out of that either. Recently, some good news. The US is to be commended for unilaterally pledging that it will no longer conduct ASAT tests. That's an important statement. It followed it by a predictable statement, but it also said that it will retain the capacity to do so. But that's okay, we will take that. The Russian foreign minister immediately after that seconded that pledge, which was also a very positive development. The UK is also to be commended for spearheading the UNGA recent resolution 7536, which led to the formation of the open-ended working group, the OEWG, a very important development. They met this week here in Geneva. They will meet again in September, and they have 2 meetings lined up for 2023. I'm optimistic, but remain unconvinced that anything will come out of this, given the history of international diplomacy. But it's worth a shot. So to sum this up, just a reminder that space is congested, contested, and competitive, and becoming increasingly so in an irreversible fashion. And that's good in a way, because we need to be in space. Of course, we need to declutter space by dealing with space debris, but I think the militarization of space is a serious, serious problem. Of course, it's a global commons that belongs to everyone. And collective security, which is relevant here on Earth, is even more relevant in space. Because as I said in my quote, that if space becomes critically unsafe, it will not be selectively unsafe. And I think most space powers know that. So what's the hang-up? I mean, if it seems so obvious that space is a particular domain that is important for humanity, both now and in the future, if we clutter space because of irresponsible ASAT tests and space debris, or conflict, whether it's intentional or unintentional, we will be in deep trouble. And no one will be able to escape that conundrum. I think the open-ended working group is a start. It's a very good start. It's being led by the able ambassador from Chile, Ambassador Helmut Lagos Kohler. He's a very able man, and if anyone could do it, he could. 50 states attended yesterday, the meeting here in Geneva. But just to put it in perspective, when this resolution passed, some major space powers descended from voting for it, which tells you that even talking is sensitive in space. I mean, how can you descend from the idea? Because this is non-binding, it's non-committal. The idea is just to talk and to debate space threats, which was really the mandate of this group. And one of the reasons for this, because it's illogical that people don't want to talk. People have been talking on and off for years, but nothing happened. Why? Because it turns out, actually, and this may be unusual to say or hear, that it is not in the nature of state behavior to give up a competitive edge, if it has one. That has never happened in history and unlikely to happen in the future. The only exception to that, which proves this point, is really the nuclear issue. But the nuclear issue is a clear and present danger to everyone. And that's why some sort of an understanding was undertaken. Even though individual countries keep making their nuclear weapons more lethal by the day and better delivery methods. So it is part of the nature of human nature, if I can say that, and the state, which is a collection of human natures, and what we call in geopolitics strategic culture, which is really the collective nature of what the state, how the state sees itself and how the state sees others. And to me, the only way, and which is comparable to the nuclear issue, is if we have parity or near parity in space capacity of various states. Currently, we do not have that, which I think is the clear explanation of why people are not interested in sitting down and ironing out an agreement. And the reason is some states, they're so far ahead of the game, they don't want to be held down by a binding agreement. I think the only way they will do so, just like the nuclear issue, is if there's parity or near parity in terms of capacity by other states, and that is on its way. I don't know when that's going to happen. Clearly, the paramount hegemon in space is the US. Russia is a very capable space entity, but so is China. The EU has a tremendous know-how in space, but it tends to be more non-military. NATO is a different ballgame. As we said, in 2019, it has joined the lineup for potential adversaries in space. So the central issue of state behavior, which we deal with in geopolitical analysis every day, is that transparency and confidence building measures are counter to national security paradigms. That is a conundrum that there's really no way of getting around it. For example, if you want to agree on some sort of an understanding in space, you have to disclose some of what you do, some of what you have up there. And no state, especially if it has a real edge, is going to do that. It may do that if there's parity and near parity. So that's important to remember. And the parallel, I think, for any understanding in space in a binding way is really the nuclear issue. And the nuclear issue, for years, nobody wanted to talk about it unless there was clear parity or near parity. The MAD concept, the mutually assured destruction concept. In space, we're not there. Hopefully, we'll never get there. But I think that is because people, even I, when I reflect on these things, and I attend a lot of conferences and read a lot of literature, it makes no sense because space is such a highly intertwined entity with terrestrial everything, everyday activity. So meanwhile, what can we do? I think we're stuck. I am for any kind of multilateral instrument, including this open-ended working group and the UN Office for Outer Space with their COPUS and pushing for the peaceful use of outer space are all commendable acts, and any bilateral talks. I'm not very optimistic that any of them will materialize to any extent because people have been talking for decades. And it's no accident that the last meaningful treaty was 1967. I mean, that's telling. There is no will to actually reach a binding agreement. So what can we do in the meantime? I think we need to keep talking bilaterally and multilaterally, and the UN system is probably the only meaningful platform to do this, either through the Outer Space Office in Vienna, or the Conference of Disarmament here in Geneva, or the General Assembly, which was the originator of the open-ended working group. An additional, I think, exercise that we should undertake as a global community which could advance the cause of peace in space and prevent conflict, is space traffic management. Space traffic management is so important. But again, there lies the problem, because in order to have space traffic management, you need to have space awareness. You need to know who's there and where. And that goes back to the original conundrum I mentioned, the transparency and cooperative efforts often is pushed back by national security concerns. And I honestly don't see how we can get out of that. The space traffic management paradigm is possible, but why hasn't it been done so far? It's because it goes back to, it appears like an innocuous, benign exercise because you're avoiding unintentional conflict. But nobody's doing anything about it, and it's because of this national security problem. But I think we should push for a space traffic, even in an inadequate one, because one of my biggest concerns is not an intentional threat in space, but an unintentional through traffic issues. An important satellite crashes into another. Never mind the space debris that may result from that, but it may be seen by the state on the receiving end as an intentional act, and it may be very difficult in a time-sensitive way to convince them that is purely accidental, which it may not be, given the plethora of malign activities in space that exist, and everybody knows everybody does it to everyone else. The spoofing, the jamming, the attempt hacking. So I'll stop in a minute, but just to sum up, that I think the militarization of space, to me, and space traffic management, one is intentional, one is unintentional, are conduits to pseudo-inevitable problem now or in the future. What's holding us up, I think, is national security concerns and the lack of parity in space. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nayev. Actually, it was very interesting in presentation. For sure, we have a long way to go in matters of security in outer space, but I think the first step, as you said, will be this open-ended working group that is going on the first time there in Geneva. So I'm looking at the chat, and we have no questions, but a comment from from Fiona Thompson, and it says space appears only to be a global common for the most dominant spacefaring nations that have access to the orbits, lead on legal frameworks, and own the new space commercial companies. Intentions are often well-meaning, but are too often overtly colonial in nature.
I agree with that comment. But in reality, I mean, the big space powers, the US, China, Russia, the EU, but there are about 80 spacefaring nations that have at least one space asset in space. But there's really no political will to make it a true global commons, because it is. I mean, it really is. But the comment is spot on, in that it's not living up to its nomenclature.
Yeah, for sure. And we have actually an interesting question. It's from an anonymous user, and it says, how do you think you can make progress in general about creating rules of behavior in space to avoid collisions?
Very difficult. Just to follow up in my talk, I think if the national security concerns of individual major powers, really the solution is in the hands of major space powers, which are the big four. If people can relax a little bit, that if somebody knew a little bit of a technology, it's not the end of the world, and the payoff will be preventing unintentional space threats through an accountable space traffic management paradigm, it will be worth it. Don't hold your breath. National security paradigms are ultra conservative, ultra patriotic, ultra suspicious, and that's the nature of who they are, and probably they have to be like that in order to do their job. But this is a very special domain, and I think wiser minds need to come to the fore, because otherwise it's inevitable problem sooner or later. And I'm counting more on the unintentional. I don't think people are stupid enough to do intentional space offensive capacity.
I think, just as you said, that it will be more unintentional than intentional indeed. And I just want to say that the anonymous user was not anonymous at all. It was the Colonel Hernán from the Chilean Air Force. So he just pointed that out.
Okay.
Magdalena, it's Nicholas here.
Hi, Nicholas.
Yeah, hello. I have a very short question to Nayev. Thank you, Nayev, for your inspiring talk. So important and so central as we see today. And my question, I will start with a comment and then comes the question. So we have seen in Copus for many years that the broader perspective of space security was not really dealt with until the report of the GGE, the TCBMs, the Transparency and Confidence Building Measures in Outer Space Activities, came in 2013. Suddenly, this awareness of delegations attending Copus sessions, and we know we are dealing with the peaceful uses of outer space, not the security dimension, but there was a sense that we should also pay attention to the broader perspective of space security. And we know it encompasses safety, security, and sustainability of outer space activities. But that was 2013. And since then, we see a gradual, I would say, change in the views of delegations to try to, well, I would say, go back to more or less a silo approach, to have COOPUS dealing with safety and the security community in the UN system dealing with security. Now, with the open-ended working group, we see a dialogue that is also encompassing international space law, the peaceful uses of outer space, a lot of areas that are not at all as such related to security, international peace and security. So I was going to ask you, do you think that this positive dialogue, if it is positive, I don't know, because I'm not following the open-ended working group, but that a dialogue in the open-ended working group surrounding safety, security, sustainability of outer space activities, because that is what is happening, that could also have a positive spin-off in the debate in COOPUS, so that we can look also towards the broader perspective of space security, even in the COOPUS framework. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, wonderful seeing you, Nicholas. Thank you for the invite. The title of the open-ended working group is that it was addressing space threats. So that was central to its mandate. The fact I mentioned in my talk, the fact that a couple of important space powers actually did not vote for it, even though it's completely non-committal, is not a positive signal. Ambassador Lagos yesterday gave a talk in a conference I was doing on the militarization of space, and he said one of his central missions is to really engage those states that did not vote for this open-ended working group, and I think that's a very wise thing to do. But you know, as I mentioned in my brief remarks, there is no political will to limit the capacity of major space powers in space, and that's not going to go. That's not going to go away. It's not going to change anytime soon. And central to treaties, you're the gurus, you at the Outer Space Office of this. To get treaties, people have to compromise. If you're so far ahead of the game and you don't feel the need to compromise, you're not going to agree to anything. I mean, that is true of human conflict, individual conflict, and state conflict. And as I said in my talk, state behavior throughout human history, if it had a competitive advantage, it will never compromise on anything unless it feels it doesn't. So I think the spillover to the COOPUS is real. I think as long as people are talking, I'm all for it. Am I optimistic that this will materialize to anything meaningful? No, I'm not. Because even with just because diplomacy, as you know, and you're a respected and distinguished diplomat, is difficult. And consensus is very difficult, and it takes time, and it's complicated, and sometimes the reasons are not obvious. You know, I have conceptualized in my work about the emotionality of states. You know, as you know, international relations theory presupposes that state behavior is governed by rational calculations. Well, we know throughout human history and even contemporary history that some states, even accountable states, overreach in a non-rational way. So, and space lends itself because of the pride and prestige, you know, and the kind of the halo around this capacity, which is deteriorating. I mean, the gap. So, I'm not optimistic. Is it useful? Absolutely. Its mandate, I think, is too broad, but it needed to be broad. Will it spill over to your eminent committee? I hope so.
Thank you so much. Magdalena, I see a question on cybercrime. Please ask that to Nayef, because that is an interesting question. Thank you.
actually was thinking the same thing. It's a very interesting question, and it says, how do you see cybercrime in outer space?
Right. Actually, I wrote a very interesting paper in the Space Review on the intimate link between cybersecurity and space security. And of course, space communication with space asset is by definition through cyber, because they're remote entities. So space and cyber are two sides of one coin. And the risk of malign activities through cyber, and anyway, you couldn't really engage with space assets, either correctly or incorrectly, without cyber. So cyber lends itself very well to malign activities in space, both by states doing it to each other, non-state actors, and transnational criminal organizations, all of which are possible. I mean, I might add that most states and even the private space spend a lot of money and a lot of capable effort on increasing the resilience of their space assets. But like with everything else, nothing is really immune from a potential intrusion.
If I may.
I'm sorry, I wasn't with the microphone. Thank you very much, Mr. Nayev, for your words and your knowledge. And for now, I would like to turn to our next speaker in this program, the last one, Mr. Marcus Waltron from the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, talking about the space and the common agenda. Mr. Marcus, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are and listening in to this interesting exchange. It's a really pleasure to be here. First of all, thank you for the Government of Chile, the Chilean Air Force, for organizing this great event. It was really great to listen to the previous talk, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. I will try to share my screen. Just give me a second. I hope you can see my screen now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Perfect. So thank you very much. And I actually the talk, or the content of the talk, is actually building up on what the professor said before in his speech, in terms of being all for talking about the importance of space and supporting multilateralism and bilateral discussions. And that's all about the common agenda. So I really would like to thank for giving us the opportunity to highlight the importance of the process around the common agenda, which is currently happening within the UN. And I will try to highlight a bit the background to the story of where this is all is coming from, and also where the space track is coming in, and why this is important for the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, member states being involved in the committee, but as well for the Office for Outer Space Affairs. So just to give you the big overview, what is the common agenda? So the Secretary General received the mandate by member states to develop his common agenda with the 75th anniversary of the UN. He was requested to report back with recommendations to advance the common agenda and to respond to current and future challenges. The common agenda was launched in September last year, and the report looks really ahead to the next 25 years, and it presents more or less this DSG's vision on the future of global cooperation, reinvigorating inclusive networking and effective multilateralism, building up on what we have just heard before. As I said, the report was presented last year in September to the General Assembly. So what does it include? Within the resolution, the 75th first resolution, the member states have laid out 12 different areas of work for the future. So these leaving no one behind, building trust, also upgrading the United Nations. So as you can see from this picture, it really looks at very, very broad topics. And the Secretary General was tasked to report back on actions and activities under these various areas. So the process was started and the consultation process on the common agenda was initiated by the Secretary General, by the offices of the United Nations, and going beyond the UN system. So the DSG was not looking only within the United Nations system, but also going beyond, because one of the major goals was to have a broad multi-stakeholder process and dialogue. The consultation process built on a year-long global listening exercise. It conducted surveys, engagement with member states, letters to permanent representatives and observers in October 2020, work through the UN Foundation. So the development on the work of these 12 themes started in October 2020, and it lasted for 1 full year. There were consultations with the broad stakeholder engagement, parliamentarians, civil society, think tanks, and leaders, networks, underrepresented groups, to give the entire report as broad as possible support. I've showed you before this very generic and very broad outline of the different areas that the Secretary General was requested to work within, and within these 12 months consultations and this entire consultation process, under these 12 areas, the following was mapped out, and this is just an overview of the different areas the result or the process resulted in. And I really would like to highlight the areas which are important of this discussion of the Office for Outer Space Affairs and of the space track of the common agenda. So on the one hand side, we have under the topic of promoting peace and preventing conflicts, we have peaceful, secure, and sustainable use of outer space, as we have heard in the talk before, including through a multi-stakeholder dialogue on outer space. And in addition to that, when you look at the various high-level tracks which have been proposed within this common agenda process, outer space has been mentioned as one specific track. So despite the fact that we have so many challenges in the world in various areas and domains of the mandates of the United Nations, in this process, in this overall process, besides the high-level dialogues, high-level tracks on climate action, sustainable development, new agenda for peace, outer space has been developed as one dedicated high-level track, which is really putting the attention of the global community on the importance of outer space. So just highlighting this, because what was the angle, what was used to support this argumentation within the report itself? It is underlined the importance for the international community to target this area of domain was underlined by the increasing launches, by the increasing satellites being launched, as well as supported by the increasing threat of space debris. This was just exemplarily used for the importance of the international community to start addressing outer space and putting this closer to the heart of the United Nations. Also, another area we heard it also before in the previous talk, discussions around the common agenda, the acceptance of a common agenda. So it was highlights, and it's important for us as this current generation to protect outer space as a global commons for the use of future generations. One of these tasks, which the Secretary General always underlines, the importance of us supporting and leaving a planet behind for future generations. So what does it mean? How is then being translated this area of domain into the common agenda? So outer space has been traditionally acknowledged as a global commons, and I really would like to highlight here on this slide is that on the one hand side, the already existing work, which has been developed through the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, has been acknowledged and highlighted as one of the central elements on the important existing governance arrangements in outer space. That's really one key message from the report. And the other one the other message from the report is that with this renewed area of exploration and use of outer space, there is the requirements and demands of looking into potential needs for improvements or adaptations in terms of outer space governance. We have heard it before. We have seen a full panel in this discussion on space traffic management or space traffic coordination, on the principles of governance of outer space. So it is really a recall that on the one hand side, there's a system in place which has been negotiated successfully through an existing body within the United Nations. On the other hand, we see this this new area and renewed area for exploration and use of outer space. So this is one paragraph, and the other paragraph is making actually this link to what has been recently achieved within the existing intergovernmental body and forum, that the results and the guidelines of the LTS has shown that progress is possible, but as I guess has been identified throughout the past 3 days, also some gaps remain and would need to be addressed in the future. So all of that is a combination, is a nice package enshrined in the common agenda of the Secretary General, putting space in one of the main important areas for discussions for on the implementation of the common agenda. So what are the main outcomes envisioned? And I put this here. This is language from the common agenda report itself. It is, and I really would like to stress a high-level reference on the peaceful, secure, sustainable use of outer space in the outcome document of the Summit of the Future. So we have to remind ourselves when talking about something like that is that there's so many different elements which are enshrined in the common agenda. We talk about new agenda for peace, new agenda for disarmament, sustainable financing for development. And then outer space is also within these discussions. So there has been a reference with regards to the outer space domain to come up with a high-level political reference in the outcome document. It has been very strongly referenced to potentially reference in this high-level political reference to reference the negotiation of an international document on the prevention of an arms race in outer space, elaborate principles and guidelines applicable to the active removal of space debris, and agree to common principles for governance of outer space and to develop an international regime for space traffic coordination. This has been very specifically mentioned within the common agenda document. It is something which I really would like to highlight, that there's obviously different ways of coming to this conclusion. So there's all these different tracks which are discussing the different elements within the common agenda are having different potential outcomes. And obviously within the space community, it is a possibility to come up with a reference to these areas and these results. Who are the main constituents? Obviously, it is a member state process. So it has been initiated. So there was this resolution which gave the Secretary General the mandate to develop the common agenda, but the process is afterwards is a member state driven process. So it is very clear that this process is meant to be providing wind under the wings of the existing international intergovernmental fora. So really to provide support for the expert committees within the United Nations to develop this high-level political reference, which I mentioned before. Obviously, and it was agreed that there should be a multi-stakeholder dialogue, and therefore, obviously, space industry stakeholders are involved, major academic institutions, civil society, non-governmental organizations, and this is from the broad constituents with regards to the process. And obviously, UN internally, it is clear that the office is in charge of the various domains, and we have heard about the open-ended working group, which is supported by the colleagues from ODA. That's one element. UNUSA, as secretary to the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, is obviously another area, another entity constituents within this process. UNIDIR itself could be approached. UN Space could be approached and be used as a platform for information to member states. So all of these constituents are regarded as important elements with regards to the developing the outcome on the Summit of the Future. So the sustainability aspects. So if you look at what I said before, the main envisioned outcomes, you can separate security and sustainability aspects. The sustainability aspects will be primarily addressed through the Vienna environment, meaning the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. Additionally, UNOOSA is currently planning a sequence of activities to facilitate the preparation. Just a reminder, it is a multi-stakeholder process, so UNOOSA is in coordination with a government to potentially host an event, specifically the discussions on a broad multi-stakeholder dialogue on global space governance, on the space traffic coordination, to get these constituents all on board. Also, Austria committed to co-host the World Space Forum 2022, which looks more in the use of space technology for the facilitation and how space technology and application can be used for the implementation of the other areas of the common agenda, such as disaster management, climate change, and so on. The security aspects, on the other hand, will be preliminary developed through the open-ended working group. It is ongoing at the moment. It is certainly an interesting time for discussion, and it is expected, or it could be, this open-ended working group could be contributing exactly to the outcomes, for the inputs of the outcomes of the Summit of the Future. And last but not least, the Resolution 7655 mandates a further joint panel between, I would say, the two different committees within the General Assembly discussing the security and the sustainability aspects of the common agenda. And this could be one milestone where these two processes could jointly look into what this outcome and the Summit of the Future could be bringing in 2023. So what are the next steps, and what is the current status? What has happened so far? Where do we go from now? And what is going forward? So after the Secretary General has reported back to the General Assembly on the common agenda, the member states have requested to go through the General Assembly again in a consultation process. The entire common agenda has been split into 5 consultation processes. Obviously, space was also in this consultation processes. It was cluster consultation and cluster consultation 3 have been discussed, the outer space issues. Within the General Assembly, there were member states had time to respond to the various aspects of the common agenda, and it was a 3-minute statement, and nearly 30 member states took the time to reference the importance that outer space is mentioned in the common agenda, which is really a very positive outcome. So this was part 1 of the consultation with member states. Part 2 with the member states was that there was kind of a fireside chat hosted within the UN Secretariat building in New York, and experts from external to the UN were able to speak about the importance of the various topics being included in the common agenda. And Mr. Peter Martinez from Secure World Foundation, he discussed the importance of outer space within the common agenda. So these 2 elements are leading now to the report of the President of the General Assembly on this consultation process, and this will be released soon. We see the open-ended working group, the first meeting is going on currently. We are looking for COPUS next month to also potentially pick up this topic in one way or the other, under the leadership of member states, to discuss how the Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space can contribute to this, to the outcome of the Summit of the Future. And as I have referenced before, UNOOSA will be working on the creation of multi-stakeholder events in the next couple of months. And obviously, I have mentioned it before, and I've hinted towards the importance of that. The meeting between the 1st and the 4th committee is one part where these processes, these 2 security and sustainability aspects process of the common agenda and this outer space dialogue could be coming together. But nevertheless, for looking forward for the Summit of the Future in 2023 and the potential outcome document, there's a need for bringing these two processes through the open-ended working group, as well as through Corpus and the peaceful and sustainability aspects in one way or the other together. I have marked a last point here as well. Obviously, there's potential other opportunities as with regards to next steps, depending on member states' decision in the various fora. So with that, I close here. I really thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present on space and the common agenda. I think it was perfectly scheduled after the talk from before on highlighting the importance of keeping up an open discussion forum, multilateral exchanges. And it is really to stress and underline once more again that that outer space is seen in one of the key documents providing the vision and the work of the United Nations in the next couple of years. So thanks again for giving me this opportunity, and back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bertrand. Actually, was a very interesting and very clear presentation. I was looking in the chat. We have already a few questions. I will start with one from Kate Singler, and it says, "How can COPUOS observe organizations get involved in this work and the Summit for the Future?"
Thank you very much. As I have outlined, there's two opportunities. On the one hand side, through the multi-stakeholder processes. UNOSA will be soon making announcements on the various events which we're going to host, such as the World Space Forum, which is going to be hosted in December in Vienna. So that's definitely one of these multi-stakeholder processes where we're looking at especially the representatives from the broader space community, non-governmental actors, private sector, university representatives. So all of them can contribute to these two processes. And in addition, and I think that's for the committee and the peaceful use of outer space to decide, and the member states therein represented in terms of how the discussion within the committee is going to be taken forward. So one element for sure, UNOSA is supporting this multi-stakeholder process and as enshrined in the common agenda. On the other hand, we will see member states' decisions with regards to how this process is going forward.
Thank you very much. Well, we have 3 other questions. One says, oh, I'm so sorry. How do you get involved in the consortiums and conference for people like us, for example?
So this is very, very pragmatic approach. UNOSA is communicating through our various websites, social media channels, and activities when we are going to host the events. So on the one hand side, as I said, we will be hosting the event with the Government of Austria. It is an application process. You obviously, we are in these times, we are bound by global restrictions with regards to COVID measurements and so on. But it is an application process to join this activity in December in Vienna this year. The second one I haven't mentioned, and with which government we are currently in discussion because it's not final yet. But we are in the final stages to reach an agreement to host this event next year in the first quarter of 2023, which focuses more on the space traffic coordination part and the global governance part. And that's the same procedure. It's same. We will make the announcement, and you can apply to join and contribute. You can submit abstracts for which are going to be reviewed by the organizers, and then if selected, you can present on the subject matter of your expertise.
Thank you very much for that information. So we invite multiple participants to join in these 2 initiatives, and we have 2 questions from Mark Mayer. The first one says, in which ways could we coordination between all the other intergovernmental organizations to reach the common goals? And I don't know if you want to read both questions. I think they are linked. How can we promote space awareness and the 17 SDGs to the world's public?
So on the one hand side, on the intergovernmental processes, the development of the common agenda was already an effort by the UN system at large. So other international organizations, not only secretariat organizations, but also affiliated agencies and others have been consulted in the process. So that was the first step. And as a result of this first step, it resulted into the call for each of these processes. And I see that there's many different processes. I really would like to stress it's New Agenda for Peace. It is disarmament. It is sustainable financing for development. It is also upgrading the UN and how the UN in itself works. So all of these elements are consulted within the process, and each of these tracks, the various intergovernmental organizations and intergovernmental processes have been approached. On the second question, I think that's one of the main tasks which we are trying to achieve through our external relations, public information, and outreach officers to raise the awareness on the importance of a space for the implementation of the SDGs. We are only 8 years away from 2030, which is the target goal of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. That much has already been achieved. We, thanks to the work of constant work of our colleagues and the entire Office for Space Affairs, but the entire space community has taken the SDGs as a demarcation line for where we are, what we are aiming at, and how we can use space technology for the implementation and for the benefit of all. So this work is done constantly. We count not only on the system itself, but also on all of you who know so much about space, and you know how space is important for the implementation, and how space technology, and we heard it before, space is part of our society. So with that, it becomes natural that space is important for the implementation of the SDGs. So I think we all are all requested to carry that message out wherever we go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waltran. And I'm so sorry. I know that there's a few more questions, but because of time, we need to go on in this conference. And before we jump into the conclusions, on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile, I would like to thank UNOSA for the invitation extended to our country to organize this seminar on space law and policy, governance and legal perspective on space activities in Earth orbit and beyond. We had the opportunity to listen to very interesting presentations by the authorities and experts from institutes such as the Chilean Air Force, ANEPE, ESO, Geneva Center of Security Policies, universities, and so more. As we heard in several of the presentations, space law presents very important challenges, such as the adoption of voluntary instruments that allow us to advance in a governance of outer space activities in an international space law. The incorporation, for example, of children, youth, and women into space science, and to ensure a sustainable use of outer space, as well as the benefits from the space applications reach for all the states. We trust that with the initiatives such as the Open-Ended Working Group on Space Risk Reduction through Norms, Principles, and Rules of Responsibility behavior being developed in Geneva and chaired by the Chilean Helmut Lagos, it will help us to be pending in challenges in space. Countries like Chile from the far south are contributing with the initiatives such as the creation of a new institutionality framework, and that we allow to create a dynamic and a modern space policy, for example. It will allow us also to create space systems and programs with the UNOSA supported that matters in space law for new actors. Finally, I would like to thank the Acting Director of the Office of Outer Space Affairs, Mr. Niklas Hedman, Mr. Michael Newman, the UNOSA team, and to the interpreters for the wonderful work they have done during these 3 days. I will also like to thank Undersecretary of Defense, Fernando Ayala, and his team, the Air Force and ANEPE for their fundamental support in the co-organization of this conference. From the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we will continue to support and contribute to develop the space diplomacy. Thank you very much to all. And now I will pass the floor to Mr. Niklas Hedman for the conclusions and observations. Mr. Niklas, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you indeed. Yes, we have developed, my colleague is now getting the screen on and magnifying so that you can all read it. Excellent. So we have developed a few paragraphs of observations from this event together with our co-organizer, the Government of Chile. And I just want to explain before we go just look into those texts that there will be a report drafted after this event, and it will be presented, issued for the next session of the legal subcommittee in March 2023 in all official languages of the United Nations. It will list the attendance, it will outline the objectives of the conference, it will also review very briefly all the topics that were discussed via the presentations that we have heard over those 3 days. And there will be then this chapter on some general observations and conclusions. So I don't intend to read out this text, but I will give all participants some time to just read through and then ask if there is any fundamentally important issue that you wish us to explore for this text. So it's a few paragraphs. If my colleague can just scroll down so we get a full picture. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we have, 6, 7. I think we have 8 paragraphs. Okay. So if you go up again and we can try to have as much text as possible on the screen. And in a few minutes, you can scroll down to the remaining paragraphs. And then I will ask all participants if there is anything that we have missed. Obviously, this is not a drafting exercise. No, we cannot do that. This is just, some general points that we thought were really needed to express after this important conference. So take a few minutes to read the text on the screen. And if you can scroll down a little bit so we get also the last paragraph on the screen. Yes, perfect. Okay, so I'm just asking participants if there is anything you observe here, anything you wish to express. I see here from Mark Mayer a comment, what is about the future development through courts, case law, and behavior? I think that goes a little bit too far into details of what we want to say in this particular context. But Michael, anything you have any thoughts on that comment? I doubt that it actually is possible to achieve any good consensus language surrounding behavior in this stage.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, and thank you for the question and the comments. And we, of course, are looking forward to future developments from courts, case law, and behavior. The more we have of this, the better guidance we will have in our in our future work. And of course, those will be the subject of when they do occur. Usually those are a bit after the fact. And we have, as we have seen, we are looking so much forward into our future and looking to plan these activities and set up governance structures that are forward-looking and proactive. And while we hope that there will be developments in courts, case law, and behavior, we certainly would like to address those as they come. Here, I agree with Nicholas. This is the context of this of these observations from this conference, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I don't see what you see. Okay, I see a comment. Thanks for sharing, much appreciated. What do you think is the most unique new statement in the document that hasn't been stated in previous documents? I don't understand the comment fully, but the issue here is we are not drafting space law now here, obviously. It's just, a few observations from this conference. And as you are aware, we have not gone into all the specific areas addressed in the conference because it's not possible. And we have dealt with a very complex agenda, as you can see over those 3 days. And the topics that we, together with Chile, selected for this conference are really the ones that are on the agenda today and that actually gain a lot of attention from member states of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And as you have seen over those 3 days, many of those items are novel to the space community because we are now reaching new activities in outer space. And it's really important to note here that it's a very complex area. And we are really, I would say, we feel quite, I'm looking for the best word here. Let me say thrilled. We are very thrilled that we were able to put together this conference together with Chile, where we were able to address all those highly complex, highly political areas that are under consideration or will be under consideration forthwith within this intergovernmental body. So in that sense, this conference has opened up for new questions and that require different answers. And that is what I wanted to conclude here, that this conference has really benefited a continuous dialogue among actors and stakeholders that could actually also help this intergovernmental body to make its multilateral efforts even more inclusive. So with that, I think I want to close this. Magdalena, we are now ready for the closing remarks from organizers. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Hedman, for these words. Yes, for the last part of this conference, now we will pass for the closing remarks, and I will want to pass the floor to the General Luis Felipe Sáez from the Chilean Air Force. So please, General Sáez, you have the floor. I think we have a little bit problems. So because of the time and I see ANEPE, we will pass the floor first to General Christian Chateau to start with the closing remarks. Please, Mr. Chateau, you have the floor.
Thank you, Magdalena. Good afternoon to everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and authorities, I'm particularly pleased to express the satisfaction of ANEPE, that is the National Academy of Political and Strategic Studies in Chile, in contributing to the success of this conference on space law and governance and legal perspectives on space activities in Earth, orbit, and beyond. The Academy has always understood the importance of space activity. That is why it has traditionally contributed to the United Nations Conference on Space. This contribution has materialized both in an intellectual sense and in technical aspects also. This is how the Academy has joined the Chilean Air Force and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in development of these activities. On this occasion, the conference dealt with a multiplicity of relevant topics in space activity. Thus, on the first day, this event focused mainly on the issues of space law and governance, in which 6 experts presented their visions on these issues, including the Chilean perspective on the space governance. The Chilean case is representative of the way space governance has developed in Latin America, and that is why this aspect was emphasized in the conference. On the second day, the team focused on the management of space traffic. This is an issue of growing importance on the international space agenda. Several thousand space artifacts currently orbit the Earth, progressively creating considerable risks both in space itself and for the planet's surface. Finally, today, in the third session of the conference, the experts have focused on the governance of man's activities on the moon and other celestial bodies. These themes show perseverance and scientific and technological development in terms of regulating human activities in advance in the celestial bodies. It is interesting to note that law usually reacts to scientific developments after its achievements. But in this case, space law is anticipating technological development so that when it will be feasible to carry out human activities on the moon and other celestial bodies, the corresponding regulations will already be developed. In short, the conference that we are closing at this time has been a fruitful and ideal forum to discuss current and future issues on the international agenda of space, and the National Academy of Political and Strategic Studies is especially proud and satisfied with these achievements. Finally, I pledge the Academy's continued willingness to continue collaborating with the United Nations, the Chilean Air Force, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on future space initiatives. Many thanks to all.
Thank you very much, Mr. General Chateau. And for now, I will pass the floor to General Luis Felipe Sáez from the Chilean Air Force. General, you have the floor.
¿Se escucha bien ahora, no?
Súper bien.
Perfecto. Bueno, estimadas autoridades gubernamentales, diplomáticas y académicas, nacionales e internacionales, participantes del Seminario de Gobernanza y Perspectiva Jurídica de las Actividades Espaciales de la órbita terrestre, señoras y señores, muy buenas tardes. Agradezco la oportunidad de poder dirigirme a ustedes, ya que junto a los demás asistentes compartimos la visión de que el dominio espacial es un ámbito en el cual podemos crear valor público para nuestros ciudadanos, y es un ámbito en el cual todos los países tienen los mismos derechos de acceder a los beneficios que las tecnologías y el conocimiento espacial que de este se deriva ofrecen a sus pueblos y a la humanidad. La presente conferencia nos ha permitido establecer un lugar de intercambio de experiencias, conocimiento, iniciativas, visión y preocupación de cómo la actividad espacial se ha incrementado de una manera vertiginosa. Por ello, consideramos que esta velocidad de cambios requiere ser acompañada con la evolución natural de los tratados del espacio o reglamentación complementaria que la favorezca y que permita la sostenibilidad de estas actividades a largo plazo, evitando o disminuyendo en lo posible las interferencias en distintas actividades que se desarrollan en el espacio y en las actividades astronómicas, lo cual a la larga puede generar restricciones del acceso e impedir que el espacio pueda ser utilizado como un recurso para el desarrollo de las personas y de los países. Sin lugar a dudas que el devenir actual y futuro de las actividades espaciales nos posicionan en un punto de la historia en la cual tenemos que tomar acciones para mantener el acceso igualitario al espacio a las naciones, respetando y fortaleciendo los tratados del espacio, generando y fortaleciendo los aspectos de gobernanza en los países, avanzando con una mirada en la sostenibilidad espacial, que hoy se pone en una cierta encrucijada, dado la puesta en órbita de megaconstelaciones y operaciones que desde una perspectiva multilateral podrían atentar en contra de la paz y la seguridad en el espacio. La participación e incorporación de la sociedad y los estados en actividades como este seminario permite impulsar iniciativas para la actualización de la legislación espacial y promoción de las actividades del espacio 2030. Desde la Fuerza Aérea de Chile tenemos la convicción que el desarrollo de este tipo de seminarios internacionales propicia avanzar en el diálogo fecundo para trabajar en equipo y buscar en conjunto alternativas de solución que nos permitan alcanzar los beneficios que ofrece el espacio a los países y sus habitantes, gestionando el uso de este dominio de manera sostenible a largo plazo. Chile, por su parte, vive un momento histórico con relación a la generación de una nueva gobernanza espacial, con la creación de la Comisión Asesora Presidencial en materia espacial, organización que tendrá la tarea de la explotación del espacio como un medio y un recurso en favor del desarrollo nacional, de manera que le permitan a Chile posicionarse como un polo de servicios y desarrollo científico-tecnológico, y con ello como un actor relevante para la región y un aporte en la reducción de la brecha digital y tecnológica mediante el desarrollo de tecnologías, generación de conocimiento, promoción del talento y prestación de servicios espaciales que permitan a través del acceso al espacio generar un incremento de la calidad de vida y seguridad de las personas. Desde el punto de vista de la implementación de programas espaciales, Chile está en proceso de implementación del nuevo Sistema Nacional Espacial, iniciativa que posiciona a nuestra nación nuevamente en el desarrollo de actividades espaciales. Este programa, que tiene una orientación social, centrado principalmente en buscar los objetivos estratégicos de aportar y crear valor público desde las actividades espaciales, a través del incremento de la calidad de vida y la seguridad de las personas, así como favorecer una transición hacia una estructura económica más digital y sostenible como vehículo de un desarrollo a su vez sostenible de nuestra humanidad. Finalmente, quiero agradecer a la Oficina de las Naciones Unidas para Asuntos del Espacio Extraterrestre por organizar la presente conferencia y por la oportunidad de considerar a Chile en su organización. Asimismo, agradecemos a todos los participantes y actores relevantes en estas materias que compartieron su visión, información y experiencias en estos ámbitos, material sin lugar a duda valioso que nos ha permitido la materialización de esta excelente y exitosa conferencia. Asimismo, agradecemos a todos los asistentes que nos acompañan de manera virtual. Su presencia nos permite generar una gran comunidad en materia espacial. Desde la Fuerza Aérea de Chile les deseo a todos que tengan un excelente día y que continuemos en esta labor de preocuparnos de difundir la importancia y la fragilidad de nuestras actividades espaciales y que el sostenimiento a largo plazo de estas depende del trabajo internacional coordinado, integrado y persistente para así lograr disfrutar de los beneficios de las actividades espaciales con acceso igualitario y equitativo para todas las naciones y la humanidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, General Size, for your words. And for now on, and for the last time, I will pass the floor to Niklas Hedman. Thank you, Niklas.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Your Excellencies, dear participants, colleagues, I wish to close this conference by thanking, of course, all of our counterparts. Before that, I again want just to stress that we have, over these 3 days, addressed a highly complex area of space activities that concerns orbital activities and beyond orbits around planet Earth. We have discussed and dealt with the legal regime of outer space from a governance perspective, predominantly the central principles laid down in the legal regime of outer space. We have addressed perspectives of space traffic management and space traffic coordination and governance perspectives in that regard. And where you remember, we had several topical areas where we wanted to lift them up into the overall discussion concerning space traffic coordination, namely certain registration tools and mechanisms in the United Nations system and elsewhere. The very crucial area of the legal definition and the limitation of outer space, and also a novel area of how to preserve dark and quiet skies for science and society. And we also today, earlier, addressed governance perspectives of activities on the moon and other celestial bodies, particularly the question of space resources, which is highly central in the multilateral arena we see today. And lastly, we also included perspectives on the safety, security, sustainability of outer space activities from a governance perspective, leading also towards the Summit of the Future that will be held at the high-level week at the General Assembly next year. Distinguished colleagues, I wish to thank wholeheartedly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Defense of Chile, the Chilean Air Force, ANEPE, the Permanent Mission of Chile at Vienna, and the Ambassador of Chile to the United Nations in Vienna, who has helped us tremendously in putting together this program. I wish to thank our great moderators. Thank you. Our interpreters. Without our interpreters, we would not have made it. Thank you. Our IT services here in Vienna that have been helping us setting up this platform. Thank you. And my team that have steered us through this conference. My team, thank you. And lastly, all the speakers that have given their time to share with us their deep knowledge and experience in those areas. Thank you. And all participants who have been active over these 3 days, not least in the chat function. Thank you so much. So all colleagues, distinguished participants, friends, thank you so much from Vienna.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hedman, for your kindly words. And with this, we end this conference. Thank you very much for all the attendance we have in these 3 days.